What I'm going to show you was impossible to even imagine a few weeks ago. It is a new AI image upscaler and enhancer tool that is simply magical. I haven't been this excited about any technology or feature in a long time. In this video, I will show you some impressive examples of what I achieved using this tool and how I combined it into a special workflow. Watch till the end to learn my secret recipe for achieving the highest degree of detail and accuracy. First example I want to show you is this image, which originally I created in Midjourney. I used the following prompt: close-up portrait of goddess of creativity surrounded by paint, smoke and colors. So I got this amazing result and it looks great. But once you put it into Photoshop, you start to notice that it is lacking details, especially if you want to use this in print or high resolution animation or video, which we needed it for. And that is why I needed something that can enhance the quality of the image without losing the original details, which I loved. So first, what I did is brought this image into Photoshop and I used the generative expand and fill to add these additional details to create a wider shot of the image. And then I tried using the Topaz Photo AI plugin with which I created this result. So it's created an upscaled and more refined version of the original image. My main problem with this was that although it felt like a more sharper image, but it didn't actually have more detail. And also it didn't feel like a real photo anymore. So that is before and after. Generally, it just feels like an over-sharpened image. Now, because of this, I decided to go back one step and stick with the original results that came from Midjourney. And instead of using the Topaz plugin, I tried out the amazing Magnific AI website. And this is the result that I got. So from the original to the upscaled and more detailed version. And I can also demonstrate with a slider so we can see how the details from the original image update once again, before and then after. So we have a lot of interesting details added here. And of course, the same thing happens all throughout the image. I particularly love all the paint details here on the body. I think, again, Magnific AI did an amazing job here. And I also love the fact how it managed to introduce some subtle details on the hair, which then merges into the smoke and paint in the background. So we have a few details like here and there on the left side, which still looks like hair, but then it just disappears into that smoke and paint that we see further out in the image. Now, although Magnific AI is capable of upscaling images, it still has a limit currently. It can only go up to around 4400 by 4400 pixels. And we needed something bigger than that for this project, so that is why I decided to use the Topaz Photo AI plugin at this point. So instead of starting with it, use it after already applying the Magnific AI. So let me show you what happened. Thanks to the fact that we already had more detail, the plugin did a much better job. So once again, let's just see the difference before and after. So this is the result that we got from Magnific. And then these are the enhanced results that we got from the Topaz Photo AI pass that we added on top of this. So once again, before and after. And I can zoom a little bit closer as well, just so we can see it better. Before and after. Like I said, thanks to the fact that we already had more detail, the Topaz plugin could do a much better job. So instead of just relying on that, which created this result, we got a far more superior result in the end. And that is mainly thanks to the fact that we introduced Magnific AI in the workflow. Now, before we move on to seeing other examples, let me just show you how actually the tool works. So it's a simple website, very user-friendly. So you don't need to be an experienced prompt engineer to be able to use this. All you have to do is to start with the image. So you can just drag and drop that here in the input area. And immediately it's going to tell you here at the bottom what the final size is going to be and how much is going to cost you. So it costs credits, and depending on the subscription that you use, you will have a set amount of credits each month. Now this image is quite low resolution, so even the output size will still be quite small. And that is actually one thing that you currently can't change. So the only option for upscaling is 2 times. So you can get twice as many pixels in the end result as what you started with. But that is only a limitation for now. By the time you're watching this video, you might actually have options to choose from here, because it stated here that the scale factor is coming soon. It's something that you will be able to change in the near future. But what you can already do now is that you upscale an image and then drop it back in again and upscale it another time. I'm going to show you examples what happens when you use multiple passes of Magnific. But for now, I'm going to just keep everything on the default settings. So we have this low resolution image that we are going to upscale. And by the way, this was also generated in Midjourney. And as you can see, we have an area to add an additional prompt and even tweak these settings that we have here. Even the engine has a couple of options. But like I said, I'm just going to use the default settings. And we will get the result soon here on the top, and even a record of the settings that we used, because all the generations that you do on this tool will be kept below the most recent results. So you get a history of all the generated images here, which is great. So you can always go back, search, and even download anything that you created using this tool. And let's just take a look. So that's already quite impressive. We have the original image, and then we have the enhanced result. Let's just go a bit further down and look at these details. Now this is supposed to be a portrait of Frida Kahlo, and the original image looks like her, while this enhanced version doesn't look like her. It's similar, but we can tell that it's a completely different person. Now that can happen, and these things can be tweaked by adding the prompt, what you have in the image, and also increase the resemblance factor. But instead of going through all these settings, I am going to show you a couple of additional projects, since that is a better way to demonstrate what's possible with Magnific AI. I have always been a massive fan of fantasy and role-playing, and I was specifically interested in world building. So when I was a teenager, I actually created my own role-playing game, and I drew all of these various maps. It was a very extensive world, lots of things to do, lots of characters and types of creatures to play with. And I still have this passion for creating these imaginary worlds. So what I decided to do as an experiment is to see if I can use this workflow to create an incredibly highly detailed fantasy map. And here we can see the full view of this map in its current stage. But let me zoom closer, and you will see just how much detail we have here. This is a 256 megapixel image at the moment, which is a bit over 16 by 16,000 pixels. And yeah, so we can see the amount of detail here is just incredible. And I'm just going to show you one of these close-up details just so we can compare the original input, or the starting point, which is again an image that was generated in Midjourney, and the incredible amount of detail that we ended up having in the end. So let me again show you with this slider here. I'm using a layer mask with a stroke effect on it in Photoshop, in case you're wondering how I do this. So we can see before and after. The original image is just like a very rough sketch compared to what we get in the end. And again, it's the same workflow, starting with Magnific AI and then using the Topaz Photo AI plugin. But because this is such a high resolution image, I had to do it in parts, so I couldn't do everything all at once in Magnific. And I can actually show you all of these original pieces. So these are the individual results that I got from Magnific. I brought them into Photoshop, and then I had to stitch them together using mainly the healing brushes, the remove tool, and also a bit of generative fill in some places. So here, for instance, we can see one of these stitches, and then this is what I created. It could be improved further, but as a first pass, I thought this is going to be good enough. But at this point, the image was still around half the size that what I ended up creating in the end. Because once I had everything stitched up and ready to go, I used the Topaz Photo AI plugin, which created this even more detailed result. So once again, let's just compare some areas before and after. Maybe let's go to another area again. That was before and after. Another detail here, before and after, and so on and so forth. So just like before, once you have more details created with Magnific, the Topaz plugin will do an actually really good job on further enhancing those details. And I haven't yet reached the limit of this plugin, so I could run this as a single pass at the end. But the workflow didn't stop here, because I felt like there's quite a lot of empty areas in this map that I wanted to fill with detail. So I decided to introduce some interesting details like this one right here. So let me show you again before and after. Now, the way I created this is by going back to Midjourney and using a specific prompt. In this case, snowy medieval fortress, fantasy map illustration, isometric top view on white background. And I even used the tuner feature, with which I set up a specific style that then I could use on multiple assets, just to keep the visuals consistent. And once I had that image, I just had to drop it into Magnific AI to add that incredible amount of details. Once again, that we can see here is just beautiful how it retains almost all the original details, just adds so much more interest and detail. And it's worth mentioning that for these examples, I was using a higher creativity setting. So out of 10, I was using 5 instead of the default 0, which allows the generative AI model to have more freedom or hallucinations. So while trying to maintain the original composition, it's going to introduce more unique details and interest. I will show you later what happens if you use too much of this. But for this project, this was perfect. All I had to do is to mask this out from its original white background and then find the best location for it. If you ever do these type of things, you have to also pay attention to the direction of the light. So originally this asset was in this orientation, and we can see that the shadows are pointing to the right, while the other shadows in the image are on the left. So that's why I flipped it around, and now it feels like it matches much better the environment. And there's actually no limit to the amount of details we can introduce with this technique. So here is another asset that I added. Once again, there wasn't much interest there before. And then here is the asset, again coming from the Midjourney Magnific combination. And here we can see the transition, what Magnific created. Again, just unbelievable amount of detail introduced in this asset. And before we move on to the next project, I just wanted to quickly show you some of these incredible assets that I created using this workflow. If you're interested to create your own fantasy map illustration, these assets and more in-depth tutorials will be available for our latest Photoshop Fast Track course. The details are in the description below. Now here's another example of the end result using this workflow, and this is the original image I started with. Again, another image generated in Midjourney, and then the photorealistic final result using the workflow that we already discussed. Even though Magnific AI is brilliant, in some cases it might not generate the expected result even after tweaking the settings. And in particular here, I had trouble generating this cool rasta hair. So what I ended up doing to create the final result that we see on the hair is to use another similar tool to Magnific. And this is the KREA Enhancer, which is currently in an early alpha, but you can already try it out. I'm going to leave the link in the description below for this. So you can see it created an amazing result for the hair, and also for the face and the clothes and all the details below. But I preferred the result that I got from Magnific for the rest of the details. So what I ended up doing is to combine the hair from KREA onto the existing details that I got from Magnific. And it's worth mentioning that for some details like this necklace here, I actually ended up using Photoshop Generative Fill, and it did an amazing job. So this was the detail that we got from Magnific AI, which is still better than what we had in the original illustration. But because it was lacking focus, I used generative fill with the prompt leather necklaces, which was matching the style and the mood of the image perfectly. Now, in terms of whether KREA or Magnific is better, I can't really say. In some cases, one is better than the other. But what I find usually is that the best results you get when you start combining them together. But to be honest, in most cases, I could just fully rely on Magnific because it's doing an amazing job 95% of the times. Now, here's another interesting project. I created this concept art inspired by the Jurassic coast of England, where I used to live for a couple of years. And I want to mainly focus on this top section here, on the towers that you can see here and the forest that you can see here on the top right corner. So first, let me show you the towers. The way I created this is that I already had some details generated in Midjourney, but then I drew over these details. As you can see, these rough sketches of the towers. And when I ran this in Magnific AI, I got these beautiful results that you can see in the final piece. Although this method might not give you an instant result like some real-time generators can, I still love how I managed to visually guide the Magnific AI to generate the final results for me. And here is that other detail from the top right corner of this composition. So we have the original details, which have very low resolution. This is again coming from Midjourney. And when I use Magnific AI on top of this, it created this beautiful detailed painting for me. But as an interesting experiment, I also tried to turn it into a photo, and this is what I got. So you can actually turn the same input into various different media. But if you look close enough, especially here on the left side, it still feels like a blend between a painting and a photo. So some parts look more photographic, other parts still look more painterly. So what I did is I ran this again in Magnific AI. So I created a second pass, which made the composition even more photographic. So once again, original image, first pass of Magnific, then a second pass. And then just for fun, I ran it again, so a third pass with Magnific with a high creativity setting, and this is what it created. At this point, it just has a little bit too much going on. And because it's been cooked several times, we also start to notice some artifacts and hallucinations that just don't look right. So if I zoom a little bit closer, we can see that the sharpness of details in some areas don't match. And also we have small trees here in the foreground, which just doesn't match the scale of the other trees behind them. And we also have some details like water here that don't actually end up going anywhere. This would normally be a waterfall, but it just dries out before it reaches the cliffs. So if I wanted to make this final version work, so the third pass of Magnific, I would have to do more edits in Photoshop. And here you can see by introducing just a couple of generative fill layers and some adjustments, it actually starts to look more decent. Still, that waterfall doesn't look realistic, of course, because that water is just coming out of nowhere and immediately turning into this huge waterfall. But let's try not to be so picky. Instead, remember that the more times you run the same image in Magnific, the more likely you will end up with some artifacts or details that just feel out of place. I just still find it fascinating that we managed to get from this original low resolution image this high resolution photo that still retains the original composition. I wanted to also show you an example where I used Magnific again in a slightly different way than in the previous projects. Once again, we have a starting image from Midjourney with the following prompt: Witcher, School of the Bear, Jason Momoa. So I had this image in my head that he would look amazing for this role. And although this generated image doesn't look like him, but it certainly looks like a cool Witcher. But once I ran this through the workflow that you've already seen, I ended up creating this really cool high resolution version of it. If I zoom closer, you can just see the incredible amount of details here. And in this case, the way I achieved this is that I actually used Magnific first on the whole character, so the body and the head. But then because I wasn't happy with the head, I ran another magnification specifically focusing on the head. So I'm just going to zoom out to show you what I got when I ran Magnific on the whole body. And although this dude looks cool, I wasn't 100% sold on the head. I loved all the details that I got on the armor, apart from some weird hallucinations, again, like this hair here on the arm and also on the armor, and some additional details that I had to improve, but generally I just wanted the head to look even more cooler. And that's why I had this additional pass created in Magnific, focusing just on the head. And I used different settings here as well compared to what I had on the body. So the main reason I'm showing this to you is as long as you are using Photoshop, you should never feel constrained by the settings. You can use settings that work for a certain part of the image and then use different settings on other parts and then combine them all together in Photoshop. And in the end, I was also doing quite a lot of retouching here in Photoshop, also relying sometimes on generative fill or some blend modes like color dodge for the glowing eyes and so on and so forth. And last but not least, I also wanted to show you this fun example where the original image was created with a combination of Procreate and KREA's real-time generation tool, which I'm going to showcase in another video soon. But what I wanted to achieve for this project is to make this look like a 3D render. So from this very rough initial drawing, using Magnific AI again, I managed to create this. So once again, before and after. Before and after. I can also zoom closer a bit. There we go, before and after. There were a couple of refinements I had to do to get this final result, but generally I was just amazed again that I could create something that really looks like a 3D render, just relying on my initial low resolution sketch. So just to summarize, with the help of Magnific AI, I can create amazing high resolution and highly detailed work. And for the best results based on all my experiments, I recommend the following steps. Use Magnific on an entire image or a smaller detail and then combine those together in Photoshop. Fix all issues with generative fill, remove tool and other retouching techniques. And at the very end, if you still need more resolution, then use the Topaz Photo AI plugin. Right now, this is the workflow that gives me the best result. But when a new and better tool or feature comes out, you will be the first to know about it. So make sure to subscribe to our channel if you don't want to miss out. Until then, have fun upscaling and enhancing your images.